Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about what I hate about Taurus, and it does apply to the Sun, Moon, and Ascendant. Well, first thing that stands out to me, obviously, is the obstinacy and stubbornness of this sign. Taurus will often never give in, even if they know inwardly that they are indeed wrong. There's just something about them that just a lot of times doesn't want to acknowledge they are wrong. They're very steadfast in their viewpoints. That sometimes it goes to another level. And anyway, another thing I hate about the zodiac sign Taurus is the fact they could be they could succumb to gluttony. And a Taurus that is lethargic or very sedentary and doesn't really do much what they could do a lot of is indulge in foods. And I think especially, sweets is really something that Taurus really loves. And if Taurus is a sedentary type, and of all the signs, this is the sign I think that can really succumb to overeating and excessive eating in many cases. So if it's a hardworking Taurus and it's a Taurus that works laboriously, that could be different. But then there's some other Tauruses that aren't always industrious and hardworking, and that's what could happen to them is they could really become gluttonous. So anyway. Another thing about Taurus that I hate is the unwillingness to move forward. This could be a literal move in terms of making an actual move and going from a residence to another. It could just be making a major change or transitioning, going and moving on in some way, shape, or form. A lot of times, Taurus, unfortunately, will even stay in relationships, I think, that are detrimental to them. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, okay, Taurus is, I believe, in my opinion, the most fixed sign of the zodiac, given that it is fixed and an earth sign. Taurus is very unwavering. They have a very strong aversion to change. And I think it's really an unwillingness to try to move forward, to go, to really get out of certain situations. I think sometimes it actually has to do with the fact that they are very loyal and steadfast, like say in a relationship, or if it's to a community, for example. And even if it's something that's negative to them, they often will stay in it anyway because I think they still feel some kind of dedication to it. And another thing is that Taurus can be somewhat complacent. I think Taurus can be very self-satisfied, and and a lot of times they just don't want to move or make that change because to them it's almost a hardship and it could be very arduous in their mind. I think a lot of times Taurus people feel that the effort in making the change outweighs the reward, and a lot of times that's not true, and that's something that Taurus really needs to realize. Now, another thing is the lack of initiative with Taurus is also another thing I hate about them, is the fact they often won't capitalize on opportunities that are presented to them. As many of you may know, I have Taurus rising. I could relate to this. My grandparents, they had given me an opportunity to further my education out of high school, and I didn't capitalize on it. And I think today, I'm even feeling repercussions for Taurus. It just doesn't really often have a lot of enterprise or initiative, and a lot of times they don't take advantage of the opportunities presented to them. And by the time they decide, okay, well, maybe I'll do this, sometimes it's a little bit too late, unfortunately. And Taurus does not always do things right away. I think they can procrastinate a little bit. Taurus just in some cases, has a hard time making the effort to really take that initiative when they really have to, and they wait too long, and often in many cases, and of course it can be to their detriment. Now, another thing about Taurus that I hate is that they simply can be too slow. And I'm not talking about mentally, I'm talking about just in terms of doing things and doing assignments or tasks or what have you. Taurus, okay, is very methodical energy. They often take their time because they could work actually very diligently, but they go slow. I think a lot of that is attributed to the fact they want to make sure that the job gets done properly. And they really, but in many cases as well, sometimes they could take a little bit too long, and it could also hold other people up if they're working on some project in a store, or they're doing construction or something. They might work very well, but they might go a little bit slower compared to the other people, and sometimes that can hold certain projects up. Even if, the say, Taurus is on a grocery line, for example, they might take a little bit longer putting their items on the cashier belt or what have you, and sometimes it can hold other people up, unfortunately. So they're very plotting. It's generally they don't do this maliciously. They just are very deliberate, often, and slow in whatever it is they're doing. So anyway. Another thing that I hate about Taurus, and this even, I mean, of course, this is all pertaining to me having Taurus rising, and it's hard to get Taurus to go places. I mean, literally, Taurus seems to have a very strong aversion to traveling. Keep in mind that in a solar or natal chart, Capricorn will often fall on the ninth house cusp of a long distance traveling. And where Capricorn falls in a natal chart can often be where that person is somewhat restricted in whatever it is they're doing. And you have Capricorn on the ninth, and what's interesting is that in many solar natal charts for Taurus, is that the zodiac sign Cancer will fall on the third house cusp. And the thing about this is, well, the third house cusp is about our short journeys. And I think what it is Taurus can even limit themselves in that because I think a lot of times their short journeys may just be limited to who they feel at home with, or maybe just family members in that area in many cases. Taurus is very limited, I think, in their traveling in general. And I've only lived in 2 states in my entire life, and I'm 46 right now at the time I made this video. So that should tell you something. I'm not really much of a traveler. I also have the ruler of the ninth house in the 12th house of restrictions. So that, I think, does figure prominently in that as well. Well, anyway, another thing I hate about the zodiac sign Taurus is the fact they could be overly introverted and can succumb to secluded habits. And I think they're very similar to Cancer in a sense. What's interesting, my sun sign being Cancer, so I have 2 very introverted signs as my sun and ascendant. But I think Cancer, it's more of being infatuated with the home life in general. And Taurus, I think a lot of times, I mean, Taurus just it's really just generally about getting away from others. I think, remember that Aries often falls on the 12th house cusp of Taurus. I mean, in a solar natal chart for Taurus. So this, I think a lot, and really Taurus is not always strong about confrontation, and they don't even really have the really as far as, you know, being around others a lot and confronting whether you're just seeing others in general. I think they can have you know, some issue with that. Taurus can be very private, and they often are really strongly about their solitude and their seclusion, I believe. And like I said, it's a little bit different than Cancer. I think Cancer, like I stated before, it's more of a home thing, being by the home. And I think Taurus is just really just about being where it's safe, I think, is what I'm saying. And Aries being on the 12th house, Aries being, you know, 12th house can represent fears. Aries is a sign connected with volatility and violence. I think Taurus likes to be at home a lot because it's safe for them, and they feel they can kind of get away from that potential, that harshness or the violence of the outside world. So I think this is really, I mean, it might play a role in that. Well, anyway, another thing about Taurus too that I hate, in some cases it can be their indolence. And really not all Tauruses are like that, of course. And Taurus can also be very industrious and hardworking, but there's also another kind of Taurus that really can be rather lethargic, rather indolent, can succumb to some kind of inertia. So, and that's another thing that I hate about the zodiac sign Taurus. Now, another thing too that I hate about Taurus is that often they can have lack of ingenuity. Taurus is often strongly about the true and the tried. They can be very conservative in their outlook. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, and you have to look at, the whole chart for contraindicators. Now, renowned innovator Nikola Tesla, he had Taurus rising. Well, according to Astro.com, gave it a B rating, I believe. So you still got to watch that. But if he did have Taurus, assuming he did have Taurus rising, he also had Mercury in Gemini, which of course Mercury is in its dignity in Gemini. And in the chart they had, though it was a B rating, they had Mercury was in his third house, which of course is accidental dignity. So he had Mercury very well placed, and I think that helped him as well. He also had Uranus in the first house in that chart, so that could account for certain ingenuity as well, and why maybe he came across maybe a lot different than the typical Taurus ascendant or Taurus rising person. And back to the thing about Taurus with the aversion to the confrontations. Now, unlike their adjacent an adjacent sign Aries, Taurus is often averse to confrontations. Keep in mind, Aries does often fall on the 12th house cusp for Taurus in the solar or natal chart, and they're generally Taurus can be very passive, somewhat timid, and they're really not so much about confrontation. However, if Taurus is pushed to their brink and point of endurance, they will. It can come to a point where they'll just fight just about anybody, I believe, at the same time. So, anyway, people, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for what I hate about Taurus, and stay tuned next time where I'll be talking about what I hate about Gemini. Two things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis of a person, astrologically speaking, based on this alone, because astrologically speaking, the person is the sum of all their components in their natal chart, and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.